The violent storm had turned the dry Texas dirt into a slick mess of mud. The wind still howled through the trees, carrying broken branches and scattered leaves. The rain had stopped, but the sky remained dark and heavy, as if the world itself was in mourning. Tamsin Holloway gripped the steering wheel tighter, her tired eyes struggling to see through the partially fogged windshield. The wipers worked frantically, but couldn't keep up with the persistent moisture. After 12 hours at the Austin hospital as an ER nurse, all she wanted was to get home, take a hot shower, and collapse into bed. That was when something unusual caught her attention. By the side of the road, a group of vultures circled low, croaking and pecking at something half buried in the mud. The sight sent a shiver down her spine. She had seen vultures before, but never this close or this restless. Their black bodies contrasted against the grey sky like omens of death. Slowing down, she peered through the windshield, and for a moment, her heart stopped. In the center of that ominous circle, something moved. It wasn't a carcass, it was a puppy, a tiny Labrador covered in mud, trembling, barely able to lift its head. For a fleeting second, she hesitated. Taking him meant responsibility. What if he didn't survive? Could she handle another loss? Then he opened his eyes, weak but alive, brown eyes that seemed to plead for help. And in that moment, she had her answer. She couldn't leave him there. Without another thought, she pulled over, turned on her hazard lights and ran toward the scene, her feet sinking into the mud. "Get out of here!" she shouted, waving her arms. The vultures hesitated for a moment, their wings spreading in warning, unwilling to surrender their prey so easily. One let out a harsh squawk and pecked at the ground near the puppy, unwilling to back down. Tamsin's pulse hammered in her ears. She grabbed a fallen branch and swung it hard. Only then did the vultures begin to retreat, flapping up to nearby trees, but their dark eyes never left her. She knelt beside the puppy. He couldn't be more than 2 months old. His light fur was soaked, matted with dirt and streaked with scratches. Old bite marks hinted that he had already endured more than any creature should. The small animal tried to move, but his tiny legs buckled, and he collapsed into the mud. Tamsin swallowed hard. He was so light, too light. His half-lidded eyes held exhaustion, pain, and fear. She scooped him up, cradling his frail body against her chest. "Can I just hold on, little one?" she whispered, rushing back to her car. As she moved away, she noticed the vultures had begun to approach again, as if patiently waiting for her to give up on her impossible mission. But Tamsin had no intention of giving up. The puppy barely moved in her arms, a stillness that terrified her. Tamsin cranked up the heat and wrapped him in her jacket. Pulling out her phone, she tried calling an emergency vet clinic in Austin, but the signal flickered weakly before vanishing altogether. No time to waste. She hit the gas, pushing past the speed limit, her fingers tightening on the wheel. The last time she'd felt this desperate was when she'd received the call about her parents' accident 3 years ago. She'd been too late that time. She couldn't let that happen again. The car skidded slightly as she took a turn too fast. Her heart pounded. The puppy, bundled in her jacket, was eerily still, his breathing ragged. "It's going to be okay," Tamsin murmured, not knowing if she was trying to convince the puppy or herself. "We're almost there." At the main intersection, the traffic light flashed red. She glanced left, then right. Tow cars. She didn't stop. If she waited, it might be too late. The rain started falling again, first isolated drops, then a heavy curtain that drastically reduced visibility. Each minute seemed to stretch infinitely. She could feel the puppy growing colder against her chest, despite the heater being on. "Don't give up," she pleaded, checking on him quickly while navigating through traffic. "Please, just a little longer." Her hands trembled on the wheel. Memories of other losses crossed her mind like ghosts. The goldfish from her childhood, the elderly cat that didn't wake up one morning, her parents, who never came home after that stormy night. Minutes later, she screeched to a halt in front of the clinic. A vet tech rushed out, scooping the limp puppy from her arms and disappearing into the emergency room. The diagnosis came fast: severe dehydration, hypothermia, extreme malnourishment, and multiple infected wounds. "His chances aren't good," the vet said gravely, adjusting her glasses as she looked at the preliminary test results. Tamsin refused to accept that. "Then do whatever you can. He deserves a chance." Everything after that was a blur. They placed him on a heated table, hooked him up to IV fluids and antibiotics. Tamsin remained at his side, holding his tiny paw as the team worked frantically. Then the monitors beeped frantically. His breathing was slowing too much. The vet pressed an oxygen mask over his muzzle, her face tense. Tamsin gripped the edge of the table, Her own breath caught in her chest. "Stay with me, little one, so please." 1 second. 2. Then, the smallest movement. His tiny chest lifted and fell again, this time just a bit stronger. The vet exhaled in relief. He's still fighting. Tamsin didn't leave his side all night. Sitting in an uncomfortable chair next to the incubator where the puppy was, she watched every small movement, every breath. Dr. Meredith, the veterinarian, had been clear. The next 48 hours would be critical. "You should go home and get some rest," one of the vet techs suggested in the morning, offering Tamsin a cup of coffee. "We can call if there's any change." Tamsin shook her head. "I can't leave him alone. He's been through that before." The tech seemed to understand and didn't insist. Instead, she brought a blanket and a pillow to make the vigil more comfortable. From that point on, progress came in small victories. First, he managed to swallow tiny amounts of liquid food. The veterinarian carefully inserted a syringe into the side of his mouth, and he swallowed weakly. "That's a good sign," Dr. Meredith commented, smiling for the first time since Tamsin had arrived. "He wants to live." Tamsin spent the following days talking to him, telling stories about her small but cozy apartment, the backyard garden where he could play when he was stronger, the walks they would take together in the park. "So I think we need a name for you," she said on the third night, gently stroking his head. "I can't keep calling you little one, though you are really small." The puppy briefly opened his eyes and stared at her. "Caius," she decided. "It means joyful in Latin, because one day you'll be happy and full of life." But there were setbacks. Some nights he refused to eat. Other days he was too weak to move. The fever came and went as his small body fought against infections. Tamsin felt the weight of uncertainty pressing down on her. What if, despite all efforts, he couldn't make it? Would it be another loss to add to her collection of broken hearts? But then one quiet night as she sat by his side, she felt a small touch. The puppy, still frail, had reached out, resting his tiny paw on her arm. He hadn't given up, and neither would she. Tamsin was awakened by a strange sound that night. Something between a whimper and a weak bark came from the corner where Caius was. Alarmed, she quickly got up and rushed to him, her heart racing with concern. To her surprise, Caius was standing, wobbly, unsteady, but standing. His eyes, previously dull with exhaustion, now shone with a new kind of determination. "Look at you!" exclaimed Tamsin, tears welling in her eyes. "You're standing!" Dr. Meredith, who had just entered to check his vital signs, smiled broadly. "Looks like our warrior decided to take a step forward," she commented. Literally. It was a turnaround that no one expected so soon. Caius, who just hours ago was struggling to breathe, was now trying to take his first hesitant steps. His legs still trembled with the effort, but the determination in his eyes was unmistakable. In the weeks that followed, Tamsin divided her time between work at the hospital and the veterinary clinic. Gradually, Caius grew stronger. His coat, once dull and smelly, began to regain the characteristic shine of Labradors. He started gaining weight, his ribs no longer so visible under his skin. "I think he's ready to go home," declared Dr. Meredith after almost a month. "He'll still need special care, medications, and a strict diet, but the worst is over." Tamsin felt a wave of emotion wash over her. Home. They were finally going home. Tamsin's small apartment, which had always seemed like a lonely refuge after long shifts at the hospital, came alive with Caius's presence. She transformed a corner of the living room into a cozy space for him, with a soft bed, toys, and colorful bowls. But not everything was easy. Caius's emotional scars began to show. On the first night it thundered, he hid under Tamsin's bed, shaking uncontrollably. His eyes, wide with terror, seemed to relive the trauma of that stormy night when he had been abandoned. "It's okay, Caius," whispered Tamsin, lying on the floor to be at his level. "You're safe now." "I promise." It took hours for him to calm down, and even then he only managed to sleep curled up against Tamsin's chest, as if he needed the constant sound of her heart to keep the nightmares at bay. With each new day, he ventured a little more. First, he explored the apartment, sniffing every corner with cautious curiosity. Then he began to play with the toys Tamsin had given him, though he still startled at sudden sounds. His first walk in the backyard garden was a milestone. Tamsin gently held the leash, letting him set the pace. He stepped on the grass, as if testing unknown and potentially dangerous terrain. "Come on, Caius," she encouraged. "It's just grass. You'll like it, I promise." He looked at her, then at the green expanse before him. Then, as if he had made an important decision, he took a determined step forward. That night, as they watched television on the couch, Caius suddenly raised his head, his ears alert. Tamsin followed his gaze and saw through the window. Dark clouds were gathering on the horizon. Another storm was coming. The approaching storm brought with it a flood of memories for both of them. For Caius, it was the ghost of his abandonment and near death. For Tamsin, it echoed the night she lost her parents in an accident caused by a slippery road and zero visibility. Even before the first thunders could be heard, Caius was already showing signs of anxiety. His breathing quickened, his body stiffened, and he began looking for a place to hide. This time Tamsin was prepared. She had researched techniques to calm anxious dogs and created an anti-storm refuge in the closet, a small, cozy space with Caius's favorite bed, comforting toys, and a t-shirt worn by her, impregnated with her familiar scent. "Come on, boy," she called gently, leading him to the closet. "I have a special place for you." She turned on a white noise machine to mask the sound of thunder and sat beside him, stroking his ears and speaking in a low, reassuring voice. "You know," she murmured, "I used to be afraid of storms too. I still am a little, but I learned that they don't last forever. And when they pass, the world seems cleaner, fresher, like a new beginning." Caius looked at her, his eyes attentive to every word, as if he really understood. He was still trembling, but less intensely. Slowly, he rested his head on her lap. It was a small victory, but a significant one. In the weeks that followed, Caius continued to flourish. Now almost 6 months old, he had transformed into a young Labrador full of energy. His golden coat shone healthily under the sun, and he had developed a passion for fetching balls and swimming in the small lake at the community park. It was hard to believe that this vibrant, life-filled dog was the same dying puppy that Tamsin had rescued from the Vultures, but some scars ran deeper than others. On a perfect Sunday afternoon, Tamsin took Caius to the park for his daily exercise. He ran happily ahead of her, pulling slightly on the leash in his excitement. That's when something in the sky caught both their attention. Soaring in wide circles above the park, a group of vultures rode the rising thermal currents. They were just birds doing what nature programmed them to do, but for Caius they were the bearers of nightmares. He froze instantly. His entire body went rigid, and a visible tremor ran through his muscles. A low whimper escaped his throat. "Caius, it's okay." Tamsin knelt beside him, blocking his view of the birds. "They can't hurt you. I won't let them." But Caius's panic only increased. His eyes, wide with terror, fixed on the vultures. Then, in a sudden movement, he wriggled out of his collar and bolted toward the park exit. "Caius!" Tamsin shouted, running after him. "Caius, stop!" But he had already disappeared among the trees, running as if his life depended on it. Panic squeezed Tamsin's chest as she ran down the park trail, frantically calling for Caius. The dense trees partially blocked the afternoon sun, creating a maze of shadows and filtered light. Her heart hammered against her ribs, not from running, but from the fear of losing him. "Caius, Caius, where are you?" Terrible images flashed through her mind. Caius injured on the road, lost in the forest, or worse. Guilt consumed her. She should have paid more attention, should have used a more secure leash, should have noticed the vultures sooner. After what seemed like an eternity, she heard a faint sound coming from a clump of bushes near the creek that cut through the park. She approached cautiously and pushed aside the branches. There he was, huddled under the dense vegetation, violently trembling. "Oh, Caius," she sighed with relief, slowly kneeling. "You gave me a terrible scare." She extended her hand but stopped before touching him. Her nurse's instinct told her not to make sudden movements with a frightened animal. Instead, she sat on the ground, a short distance from him. "It's okay, boy, it's me, you're safe." Slowly, Caius's breathing began to normalize. His eyes, still wide with fear, fixed on her, recognizing the one person who had never abandoned him. With hesitation, he crawled toward her, inch by inch, until his head could touch her outstretched hand. "That's right," whispered Tamsin, tears of relief streaming down her face. "You're so brave, Caius, so brave." When she finally managed to put the leash back on him and they began the walk back, Caius stopped abruptly. His body tensed, but not from fear. It was something different. Attention, focus. Tamsin followed his gaze upward. On the lowest branch of a nearby oak, a single vulture was perched, its black feathers gleaming in the sunlight. It was as if the past had resurfaced for a final confrontation. She felt Caius shiver slightly at her side, but to her surprise, he didn't try to run. He didn't hide behind her. He didn't panic. He simply stood there, staring at the vulture, ears pricked and alert. For a long moment, the air felt heavy with tension. Then something shifted. Caius pricked his ears, relaxed his stance, and took a small step forward. unafraid. Then he turned to Tamsin, wagging his tail as if to say, "I'm okay now." A lump formed in her throat. Yes, he was. That night, sitting on her porch, Tamsin listened to the sounds of nature around her, the chirping of crickets, the whisper of leaves stirred by the gentle breeze, the distant murmur of traffic. For the first time since that stormy night on the road, she felt peace. Caius lay at her feet, sleeping soundly, unafraid. He was no longer the helpless puppy surrounded by vultures. He was a survivor. She had thought she was saving him that night, but maybe in a way he had saved her too, because somehow that tiny fighter had taught her about strength, hope, and second chances. Some stories don't end with a simple rescue. They're only just beginning. My friends, we've reached the end of the story. Did you like it? What lesson can you draw from this story? Leave it here in the comments. Leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and watch this video that's playing on your screen. This story will impact you. See you next time.